In the quiet town of Ukosi, nestled deep in the lush forests of eastern Nigeria, there lived a woman named Nnenna. She was famous for her swift and intricate weaving skills, not with hair but with fabric. Nnenna owned a small but bustling tailoring shop that was the pride of Ukosi. Known far and wide, people traveled for days to have Nnenna design their garments for special occasions like weddings, funerals, and chieftaincy ceremonies. She could take simple threads of cotton and turn them into masterful, elaborate outfits that left everyone in awe. But there was one peculiar thing about her shop. There were no mirrors. Not a single reflective surface could be found in the entire place. Not on the walls, not on the sewing tables, not even in the corners where her assistants worked. It wasn't long before people started noticing this strange detail, and rumors began to spread. Some whispered that it was Nnenna's strange superstition. Others said that it was to prevent people from copying her secret designs. But Nnenna herself never explained the reason behind this unusual rule. As clients came and went, the whispers turned into stories, and the stories soon became myths. It was said that Nnenna could create such perfect clothes without the need for a client to see themselves in a mirror because she possessed an ancient power, something that allowed her to see not only the body but the soul of a person. She could design for your true self. No one ever questioned her skill. Her clothes fit perfectly every time, almost as if they were enchanted. However, one day, a young man named Chidi arrived at Nnenna's shop. Chidi was new in town, having just moved to Ukosi from Lagos, the busy city life far behind him. He was getting married in a few weeks and needed a traditional Agbada outfit for his wedding. When Chidi entered the shop, he was struck by the lack of mirrors. He found it odd, but being in a small town where customs were often different, he brushed it off. Nnenna greeted Chidi warmly, as she did all her clients. Her eyes, dark and penetrating, seemed to look straight through him, as if she could see everything he was. His past, his present, his future. "You've come for an Agbada?" she asked, her voice calm yet commanding. "Yes," Chidi replied. "I've heard you're the best tailor in all of Ukosi. I need the Agbada for my wedding." Nnenna smiled but said nothing more. She motioned for him to stand on a small platform at the center of the room. With a flick of her hand, her assistants brought out a measuring tape. As they worked, Nnenna stood in the corner, her back turned, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. Chidi grew uneasy. The shop was silent except for the sound of the measuring tape snapping against his arms and legs. He felt an odd sensation in the air, as though something was watching him. He looked around but saw only the assistants, busy with their tasks. "Are you not going to show me a mirror?" Chidi asked suddenly. "I'd like to see how I look in this Agbada before I leave." Nnenna's smile vanished, replaced by a stern, almost fearful expression. "There are no mirrors here," she said firmly. "We don't allow them." Chidi raised an eyebrow. "Why not? How am I supposed to know if the Agbada is right for me?" "You will know," Nnenna said, her voice now softer but filled with an urgency that made Chidi feel like he'd touched on something forbidden. "You'll see when the time comes." Chidi left that day with no answers. His curiosity piqued. As he walked through the narrow streets of Ukosi, he couldn't stop thinking about the strange rule. He had never heard of a tailor's shop that didn't have mirrors. How could someone make clothes without letting their clients see how they looked? Didn't make sense. The following week, Chidi returned to Nnenna's shop to pick up his completed Agbada. The garment was beautiful, more exquisite than anything he could have imagined. The embroidery was so intricate it looked as if each thread had been placed with purpose, telling a story of its own. The fabric felt like it had been spun from the clouds themselves, soft yet firm, perfect for the occasion. But still there was no mirror. "I need to try it on," Chidi said, growing more impatient. Nnenna's assistants helped him into the Agbada. It fit him like a second skin. But still he wanted to see. Chidi stepped off the platform and turned to Nnenna, but before he could speak, she cut him off. "Do not ask about the mirror again," she said sternly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "If you value your life, you will not question this rule." Chidi froze. He was not the kind of person to be easily intimidated, but there was something in Nnenna's tone that made him uneasy. He nodded slowly, took his agbada, and left the shop without another word. Chidi wasn't the type to believe in superstitions or village myths. But Nnenna's warning lingered in his mind. What could be so dangerous about a mirror that it would warrant such secrecy? Determined to find out, Chidi decided to do something risky. 2 days before his wedding, he invited his close friend Emeka to his house. Emeka had lived in Ukosi all his life and knew the local traditions well. If anyone could explain the strange custom in Nnenna's shop, it would be him. As they sat on Chidi's porch, sipping palm wine, Chidi finally spoke. "Do you know why Nnenna doesn't allow mirrors in her shop?" Emeka's face grew serious, and he glanced around nervously before answering. "You shouldn't talk about that, my friend," Emeka said quietly. "People in this town have learned not to question her. You're not the first person to ask, and you won't be the last." "But why?" Chidi pressed. "I don't understand. It's just a mirror. What's the harm in seeing yourself in it?" Emeka sighed, setting down his drink. "It's more than that. There's an old story, one that our parents and their parents have whispered about for generations. They say Nnenna's shop isn't just a place for making clothes. It's a shrine." "A shrine?" Chidi repeated, surprised. "For what?" "Not what," Emeka corrected. "For who?" The story goes that many years ago, when Nnenna was just a child, her mother was a priestess. She served a powerful deity, one that demanded sacrifices in return for prosperity. Nnenna's mother promised the deity her firstborn in exchange for blessings on their family. When Nnenna grew up, she inherited her mother's gift, but also her curse. "What curse?" Chidi asked, leaning in. "The curse is that Nnenna can never look at her own reflection," Emeka continued. "If she does, the spirit that protects her will claim her soul. That's why she doesn't allow mirrors in her shop. It's not just a superstition, it's a matter of life and death." Chidi felt a chill run down his spine. It sounded absurd, like something out of a folktale, but there was a part of him that believed it. The way Nnenna had warned him, the fear in her eyes. It all made sense now. "So, what happens if someone breaks the rule?" Chidi asked. "No one knows for sure," Emeka replied, his voice low. "But they say that anyone who brings a mirror into Nnenna's shop will never leave the same." The wedding day was fast approaching, and despite the ominous story, Chidi couldn't shake his desire to see himself in his agbada. What harm could a glance at a mirror really do? He decided that after the wedding, he would visit Nnenna one last time and settle the mystery once and for all. On the morning of his wedding, as the sun rose high over the town of Ukosi, Chidi dressed in his agbada. It was stunning, just as he had expected. But something was gnawing at him. He felt incomplete, as though a part of him was missing. He needed to see. Without telling anyone, Chidi slipped away from the wedding preparations and made his way to Nnenna's shop. He brought a small hand mirror with him, hidden in the folds of his agbada. When he arrived, the shop was quiet, the air thick with an unsettling stillness. Nnenna greeted him as usual, though there was something different about her demeanor. She seemed tense, as if she knew why he had come. "I need to know the truth," Chidi said, his voice firm. "I've heard the stories, but I want to see for myself." Nnenna's face darkened, and for the first time, Chidi saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. "You don't know what you're asking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have to see," Chidi insisted. He pulled the mirror from his agbada and held it up. Nnenna gasped, stepping back as if the mirror were a weapon. "No," she cried. "You'll bring the curse upon us both." But it was too late. Chidi glanced at the mirror, expecting to see nothing more than his reflection in his beautiful agbada. But what he saw instead left him frozen in place. In the reflection, he saw not just himself, but something else, something dark and twisted lurking just behind him. It was a shadow, a figure with eyes that glowed red like embers. It wasn't human, and it was watching him. Chidi dropped the mirror in shock, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces on the floor. The room grew cold, the lights flickering as a wind blew through the shop, though the doors and windows were closed. Nnenna screamed, clutching her chest as if in pain. "You've awakened it," she cried. "The spirit. It's coming for us." Chitty's heart raced as the shattered pieces of the mirror lay scattered on the floor, each fragment reflecting that eerie, shadowy figure looming behind him. His body froze with fear, his eyes widening at the darkness swirling in the room. The wind that had suddenly whipped through the shop grew colder, howling like a distant storm. Nnenna's screams filled the room as she clutched her chest, her body trembling violently. "The spirit. You've awakened it," Nnenna repeated, her voice thick with terror. The once bustling, cozy shop had turned into something else entirely, something darker. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. The spirit, now fully awakened by Chitty's defiance of the rule, began to take form. From the corners of the room, a figure emerged. Tall, skeletal, with glowing red eyes and fingers that stretched impossibly long, curling toward the two of them like claws ready to strike. Chitty could feel the spirit's presence grow stronger. His throat tightened, and he felt as if he was suffocating under its immense weight. He had never believed in spirits or curses before, but now he was face to face with something far beyond his comprehension. The stories Emeka had told him, the warnings Nnenna had given, all of it was true. "What is this thing?" Chitty shouted, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Nnenna, still clutching her chest in pain, struggled to speak. "It's the spirit, the one bound to my family for generations. My mother made a deal with it, power and success in exchange for our souls. But if anyone looks into a mirror while I work, the spirit, it escapes its prison." The spirit moved closer, its long, bony fingers reaching for Nnenna. She collapsed to the floor, her body convulsing as the spirit seemed to drain the life from her. Chitty's eyes darted around the room in panic. He knew he had to do something, but what could he do against a force like this? "Nnenna!" he shouted, rushing to her side. "How do we stop it?" Nnenna, her voice weak and fading, whispered, "The mirror. You have to trap it again. Only a mirror can hold it." Chitty's mind raced. The mirror was shattered, and the pieces were scattered across the floor. How could he trap the spirit now? His gaze fell on the largest shard of glass nearby, reflecting the terrifying figure of the spirit. Summoning all the courage he could muster, Chitty grabbed the shard and held it up toward the advancing figure. "Come back!" Chitty screamed, his voice trembling but determined. "Get back in the mirror." The spirit paused, its glowing red eyes narrowing as it saw its reflection in the shard of glass. For a moment, it seemed to hesitate, its twisted form flickering as if struggling to maintain its shape. Chitty pressed forward, inching closer to the figure, forcing it to see itself in the mirror fragment. The spirit let out a piercing screech that echoed through the shop, shaking the very walls. It writhed in agony, its form distorting and shrinking as it was slowly drawn toward the shard of glass. The wind howled even louder, and the lights flickered violently. Chitty could feel the spirit's power pulling at him, trying to resist, but he held the mirror shard steady. As the spirit was sucked back into the reflection, the room began to calm. The wind died down, and the shadows in the corners of the shop faded. With one final ear-piercing scream, the spirit vanished into the mirror, its red eyes glowing faintly before disappearing altogether. Chitty dropped the shard of glass, his hands shaking. The room fell completely silent, save for the sound of Nnenna's labored breathing. He rushed to her side, lifting her head gently. "Nnenna, are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft and concerned. Nnenna, weak but alive, nodded slowly. You did it," she whispered, her eyes filled with gratitude and exhaustion. "You saved us." Chitty let out a long, relieved breath, his heart still pounding from the encounter. He helped Nnenna to her feet, and together they surveyed the shop. It was quiet now, eerily peaceful, as if nothing had happened at all. But the shattered mirror pieces on the floor told the story of the battle they had just fought. Several days passed after the terrifying encounter with the spirit, and life in Ukosi returned to normal, at least on the surface. Nnenna's shop was repaired, and her assistants returned to work, though none of them spoke of the incident. The shop, however, was different now. For the first time since anyone could remember, mirrors were allowed in Nnenna's tailoring shop. Word spread quickly through the town that Nnenna's strange no-mirror rule had been lifted. Some people were curious, others were wary, but everyone was talking about it. Nnenna, once secretive and aloof, now seemed more at peace. She moved with a quiet confidence, no longer burdened by the weight of her family's curse. Chidi, having recovered from his ordeal, became something of a local hero. People whispered his name with admiration, grateful for what he had done. But Chidi didn't see himself as a hero. He had merely been trying to find the truth, and in doing so, he had helped free Nnenna from a lifelong burden. One evening, as the sun set over Ukosi, casting a warm golden glow over the town, Chidi returned to Nnenna's shop. He had come to check on her, to see how she was adjusting to life without the spirit. When he arrived, he found Nnenna sitting at her sewing table, a small mirror propped up beside her. She smiled when she saw him, her face more relaxed than he had ever seen it. "Chidi," she greeted warmly. "It's good to see you." Chidi smiled back. "I just wanted to see how you were doing. How's life without the spirit?" Nnenna nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. "It's better. I can finally live my life without fear, without the curse hanging over me. Thanks to you." Chidi shook his head. "You saved yourself, Nnenna. I just held up the mirror." They shared a quiet moment, both reflecting on the events that had brought them here. The air between them was no longer heavy with secrets or fear. It was light, filled with the promise of new beginnings. As they talked, Nnenna revealed something else to Chidi. "I've decided to teach others what I know," she said. "For years I kept my skills to myself, afraid that if I shared them, the spirit would punish me. But now I want to give back to the community. I want to help others create, just like I've been doing." Chidi nodded, impressed. "That's a great idea, Nnenna. People can learn a lot from you. Not just about tailoring, but about strength and perseverance." Nnenna smiled, grateful for his words. "And you, Chidi," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "You've taught me something too. You showed me that sometimes we need help, even when we're too afraid to ask for it." The story of Nnenna and the spirit became something of a legend in Ukosi. People spoke of it for generations, not just because of the supernatural events, but because of the deeper lessons it held. Nnenna's courage in facing her curse, Chidi's determination to seek the truth, and their shared bravery in confronting the spirit taught everyone in the town an important lesson. The moral of the story was simple but powerful. Never be afraid to seek the truth, no matter how frightening it may seem. True strength comes from facing your fears and confronting the things that hold you back. Sometimes the greatest battles are not fought with weapons, but with courage, wisdom, and the willingness to ask for help. Nnenna's shop thrived in the years that followed, and it became a place not just for tailoring, but for learning, community, and healing. Mirrors lined the walls, no longer feared but embraced as symbols of reflection and truth. And as for Chidi, he carried the lessons of Nnenna's story with him for the rest of his life, knowing that sometimes the scariest things we face are the ones we can't see until we look deep within.